The night the scream tore through the olive groves, nobody heard it, not the farmers asleep behind shuttered windows, not the lovers wandering the narrow lanes beyond the Arno, not even the patrol car crawling the outskirts with its radio crackling half-dead. It was a scream swallowed whole by the Tuscan hills, a sound that should have echoed but instead seemed to dissolve into the dark, as though the land itself had learned, over generations, to keep its secrets. Inspector Marco Belandi would remember that silence for the rest of his life. Not the scream, he never heard that, but the silence that lay over the scene when he finally arrived, called from his half-drunk espresso in the station, the cup still warm on his desk as he sped through the countryside. He had been with the Florence police long enough to know the usual: stolen cars, drunken brawls, lovers' quarrels. But when the call came in, a couple found outside Scandix. "It looks bad." Something in the dispatcher's voice pinched into his chest like a cold hand. By the time he reached the clearing, dawn was only a pale bruise on the horizon. Two young officers stood stiffly beside a small yellow Fiat, its doors open like broken wings, the interior smeared with something dark and drying. And there on the grass lay the couple. A young man, barely 20, eyes open as if watching the sky light. Beside him, the girl. They had been arranged, almost posed, as if by someone who understood the terrible intimacy of death. Marco crouched near them, forcing himself to breathe evenly. The ground was damp beneath his knee, the scent of crushed rosemary rising with the earth's cool breath. He had seen horrors before, but nothing like this careful, deliberate extinguishing of two lives. Whoever had done this hadn't simply killed. They had studied, planned, lingered. "Who found them?" Marco asked quietly. "A hunter," one officer replied, swallowing hard. "He called it in around 4. Said he saw the car from the trail and thought it was abandoned." Marco nodded, but his attention snared on something glinting beneath the girl's hand. He lifted it gently with a gloved finger, a bullet casing, small, unmistakable. A .22 caliber, clean, polished, left behind almost as a signature. He felt the first stirrings of dread. Back at headquarters, the autopsy report was no comfort. The shots were precise, the wounds deliberate. No robbery, nothing taken, no sign of sexual assault. But there was something else, something that clenched Marco's stomach when the coroner whispered it, as though afraid the walls themselves might hear. "This wasn't the first time," the coroner said. "You know that, don't you?" Marco did. Deep down, he had known from the moment he saw the bodies. A killing like this didn't appear fully formed out of nowhere. It grew, it evolved, and worst of all, it continued. The newspapers caught the scent within hours. By the end of the week, Florence was whispering of a phantom, a shadow living between the folds of the countryside. They called him many things: Il Fantasma. The shadow of one headline stuck harder than any other: Il Mostro, the monster. A word sharp enough to carve itself into the city's memory. Marco tried to distance himself from the storm, focusing instead on the slender threads of evidence. The ammunition type, the precision of the wounds, the eerily clean crime scene. He interviewed the families, piecing together the couple's last night. Young, in love, they had driven out for privacy, something simple, innocent. They had parked beneath the sloping branches of the olive trees, unaware of the shadow watching them. There were no witnesses, no footprints, no tire tracks, only a hunter's startled cry and two bodies arranged like an unfinished prayer. The case consumed him. Days bled into nights, cigarette smoke ghosting through the dim interrogation rooms as he questioned anyone who might have seen a strange figure wandering the countryside. But Florence was a city full of ghosts and shadows. Every man seemed capable of being something more than he appeared. Weeks passed. The murders unsettled the region, but eventually the urgency cooled into a cautious fear. People locked their doors earlier. Couples stayed closer to home. Patrol cars doubled their routes. And slowly, painfully, life tried to fold itself back into something resembling normality. Until autumn came. It was late September when Marco received the second call. This time it was a farmer who found the car, a small blue Renault, tucked behind a thicket near the Mugnon. The sun was just rising, staining the hills gold, but the officer's voice was ice. "It's like the others, sir. You'd better get here." The scene was even worse than the first. The couple, mid-20s, engaged, planning a wedding, had been shot through the windows of their car. But the killer had escalated, his cruelty sharpening. The way the bodies were positioned suggested a ritualistic precision, a message, though to whom and why Marco couldn't guess. He examined the ground, the leaves, the bark of nearby trees. The killer hadn't rushed. He had taken his time, working in the quiet, confident that no one would interrupt him. And again, the same polished .22 caliber casings lay gleaming in the morning light like tiny golden teeth. The reports flooded in, neighbors who heard a faint pop in the night, a stray dog barking, a distant engine. Nothing solid, nothing that pointed in a single direction. The monster was becoming bolder. In the following weeks, Florence trembled. Young lovers avoided the countryside entirely. Headlights sweeping through the hills made people flinch. Every cracked twig, every rustle of wind seemed to announce the presence of something watching. Marco felt the pressure mounting. The public wanted answers. His superiors demanded results. And the monster, whoever he was, seemed always one step ahead. He began to see patterns, small ones, threads between the victims, couples alone in secluded spots, attacked quickly, efficiently. The murderer knew the terrain intimately. He knew the rhythms of the night, the hiding places, the vantage points. These weren't impulsive killings, they were orchestrated. Marco spread maps across his office, pins marking each site. Lines connected them in ways he didn't fully understand yet, triangles of empty fields, twisting paths, forgotten farm roads. He spent hours studying them until the shapes blurred and his mind throbbed. One evening, as rain battered the windows, a young officer burst into Marco's office, breathless. "Sir, another letter, addressed to the police station. No name, just you should see it." Marco opened the envelope with steady fingers, though his heart hammered in his chest. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no fingerprints, no watermark. Just one sentence typed neatly in the center. "You will never catch me." He stared at the words until they blurred. They weren't just taunting, they were confident, certain. The handwriting, or rather the clean typewritten font, gave nothing away. Marco set the letter down carefully. Something inside him shifted, a hardening of resolve mixed with a creeping dread. The monster wasn't just killing. He was communicating, watching, measuring the police response and adjusting accordingly. The next murder came the following summer, 1974. A young couple, a German tourist and his Italian girlfriend, had driven into the hills to watch the stars. They were found by hikers the next morning, their bodies positioned with that same ritualistic precision, their car door left open as if inviting the world to witness what had been done. Again, the same weapon, the same method, and now a chilling new detail. The killer had mutilated the bodies post-mortem, as if crossing a threshold he had long been approaching. Marco felt something crack inside him when he saw the scene. The brutality, the unnatural calm of the surrounding landscape, as if the hills had become accomplices. He wanted to scream, to rage at the sky, to tear the countryside apart until he found the shadow slipping through its folds. But he did none of those things. He worked. He dug deeper. He chased leads into dead ends. He interrogated hunters, ex-soldiers, reclusive farmers, lonely mechanics, anyone who owned or had ever owned a .22 Beretta. The list was long, too long. Yet every time he thought he was closing in, the path disintegrated beneath him, and the monster vanished like mist. By 1978, 6 murders had been attributed to the monster. The city's fear had calcified into a grim acceptance. Parents warned their children. Young lovers sought crowded piazzas rather than moonlit fields. The countryside grew emptier, quieter, as if awaiting the next strike. Marco's life had changed too. He no longer slept more than a few hours at a time. His relationships had withered. His colleagues avoided his gaze, knowing the weight he carried. He became a man haunted not by ghosts, but by absences, by the killer he couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't stop. One cold November evening, as he sat alone in his dimly lit office, a file open before him but unread, he sensed someone standing at the door. It was Officer Lucia Serra, one of the sharpest young recruits on the force, her dark hair pulled back, her expression troubled. "Inspector," she said softly, "there's something you should hear." She handed him a tape recorder, the small kind used for interviews. A witness came forward, a woman from a village near Signa. She didn't want to speak publicly, but she heard something the night of the last murder. Marco pressed play. Static, then a faint hum, then the woman's trembling voice. "I was walking home just past midnight near the woods. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, heavy, like someone carrying something. I turned but saw nothing. Then I heard a whisper. A man, he said it, not finished." Marco froze. The voice on the recording cracked as the woman continued. "I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't tell anyone. But then the papers, they said the couple died that night. And I thought maybe whoever I heard, maybe he was still there." The tape clicked off. Lucia watched him carefully. "Sir, what do you think?" Marco didn't answer immediately. He stared at the recorder, feeling a shiver crawl up his spine. The monster didn't linger after his kills, at least not that the evidence suggested. But this was different. A whisper in the dark, a presence near the crime scene long after the act was done. "It might be him," Marco said finally, voice low. "Or it might be someone trying to frighten her. But if it was him," he exhaled slowly, "then he's becoming reckless." Or confident, a darker thought whispered. But reckless or confident, it didn't matter. The monster had begun to step out of the shadows, just a little, enough to leave a trace, enough to give Marco a fragment of hope. Yet hope was a dangerous thing in Florence. It lifted you only so it could let you fall farther. When the next murder came, June 1981, it struck with a cruelty sharper than any before. A couple from Bologna spending a romantic weekend in the countryside, found in their tent, arranged with horrific meticulousness. The monster had escalated again, the violence reaching a new, stomach-turning crescendo. The press exploded, the city shook, and Marco felt himself slipping into a darkness that mirrored the killer's path, an obsession so deep it threatened to consume him entirely. But in that darkness, a breakthrough emerged, small, fragile, but real. A witness. Someone who had seen a man lurking near the couple's campsite earlier that evening. A tall figure, wearing a dark jacket, carrying something metallic. For the first time, they had a description. Marco assembled a task force combing through every man in the region who fit the profile. Ex-military, hunters, reclusive loners, those with ties to firearms. They brought dozens in for questioning. And then one name surfaced. A man who lived alone on the outskirts of Prato. A man known to wander the countryside at odd hours. A man who owned, according to old records, a .22 caliber pistol. Marco felt his pulse quicken as he read the report. Was it possible? After more than a decade, could they finally be closing in? He ordered immediate surveillance. But the monster always knew when he was being watched. The suspect vanished 2 days later, leaving behind an empty house, cold coffee on the table, and a stack of newspapers obsessively clipped to stories about the murders. The basement walls were lined with photographs, crime scene recreations, maps, faded articles, but no weapon, no evidence, no confession. It was a shrine, a dark tribute. But was he the monster? Or just one more man haunted by him? Marco's hope curdled into frustration. They were chasing shadows again. And then came the night that changed everything. A couple, both students, had gone for a late walk near a riverbank outside Calenzano. When they didn't return, their families called the police. Marco was already awake, drinking cold coffee and staring at the files when the call came in. His breath caught, his heartbeat thudded like a drum. Not again, please, not again. But as he arrived at the scene, a terrible stillness greeted him. Officers gathered near the trees, their faces pale, their eyes refusing to meet his. Marco pushed through them. There, lying beside the water, were the bodies of the two students, shot, arranged, mutilated. The monster had struck again. But this time something was different. The girl was clutching something in her hand. A scrap of cloth, torn dark. Marco knelt, examining it. Rough texture, wool, could be from a jacket, and near it, partially embedded in the mud, a boot print. The first real trace the monster had ever left behind. Marco swallowed hard, adrenaline surging. For the first time, he felt the tide shift. The monster had made a mistake. A small one. But mistakes had consequences. And Marco Belandi was no longer a man merely chasing shadows. He was hunting. Marco stood over the muddy imprint as though it were a sacred relic, something fragile and dangerous all at once. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then steadier, threatening to blur the only footprint they had ever found. He barked orders to the officers, urgency sharpening his voice. Lights were set up, photographs taken, casts prepared. No one breathed too loudly, as if a sigh alone might wash the evidence away. Marco watched the print harden beneath the plaster, his pulse hammering with something he hadn't felt in years. Momentum. A direction. A mistake from the monster himself, subtle but real. A thread that, if he pulled carefully, might unravel everything. The piece of torn cloth was sealed, photographed, documented. Dark wool, coarse fibers, slightly frayed at one edge. It looked ordinary, but nothing connected to the monster could ever be ordinary. Marco slipped it into an evidence bag as though handling the edge of a curse. By dawn, the bodies had been taken, the scene cleared, and only the river remained, flowing with its indifferent whisper. Marco stayed longer than the others, staring at the place where the students had died. He imagined them laughing, talking, unaware of the shadow drifting toward them. He imagined the monster watching, studying, choosing the perfect moment. He whispered into the rain, "I'm closer now. You know it, don't you?" And in the silence that followed, he felt, irrationally, yet with certainty, watched. The forensic lab moved quickly. The boot print was compared against thousands of souls in their database. Matches surfaced: hunters, farmers, workers from Florence and surrounding towns. But one match caught Marco's attention, the boot of the man who had disappeared just days before, the one whose house had been a shrine to the crimes. "Bring in everything we have on him," Marco ordered. His team gathered files, photos, old interviews. They re-examined witness accounts. But the more Marco studied the man's life, the more a strange unease grew in him. The suspect was obsessed, yes. He was a loner. He had strange habits, yes. But obsession didn't make someone a killer, and something about the photographs on his basement wall struck Marco as too reverential, as if the man hadn't committed the crimes but worshipped them, collected them, memorized them. A follower, a shadow walking behind the real one. Marco slammed the folder shut. He's not the monster, he's a parasite. But the boot print, Lucia began. Coincidence, Marco snapped, then softened. Or he was near the scene after the fact, looking, studying. We're dealing with more than one mind here, Lucia, more than one sickness. Lucia nodded, her jaw tight. Then who are we looking for? Marco looked back at the evidence board, lines crisscrossing decades of violence. Someone who blends, someone ordinary, someone invisible. The investigation thickened like a storm. New tips flooded in, most useless, some deranged, a few promising. Marco followed all of them, his life shrinking to the boundaries of Florence and the dark countryside surrounding it. He drove through vineyards under moonless skies, paced along riverbanks, questioned lovers, hunters, priests, and drifters. He began seeing patterns in the smallest things. The angle of a tree branch, the bend of a road, the way headlights caught on a field of tall grass. He sketched crime scenes over and over, layering them until the paper tore. The monster was speaking to him through absence, through silence, through the precise choreography of each murder. Marco listened. One night, after a 14-hour shift, he found himself returning to the riverbank where the students' bodies had been found. The moon cast a pale shimmer over the water, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. He crouched near the spot where the boot print had been. And he heard it, a twig snapping. He stood, hand drifting to his holster. "Who's there?" Silence. He stepped forward, scanning the shadows between the trees. Another crack. His flashlight swept across the brush. For a moment, he imagined a figure standing there, tall, still, watching him with hollow patience. But the beam revealed only darkness. He exhaled, slow and shaky. Paranoia was becoming a second skin. When he returned to the station, the chief called him in. "Marco, sit." The chief's tone was heavy, lined with exhaustion. "It's been 13 years. Marco felt his chest tighten. "You're taking me off the case." "No, but I'm giving you help, a profiler from Rome. They think it's time." Marco bristled. "A profiler won't catch him. We need evidence, patterns we need." "We need something new," the chief cut in. "The public is terrified. They want results. The monster is evolving. We need to evolve too." Marco swallowed his frustration. Change could help, or it could make things worse. But refusing help would get him removed entirely. "When does this profiler arrive?" Marco asked. "Tomorrow." The profiler was a woman in her mid-30s named Dr. Elena Riva. Sharp eyes, quiet voice, an unsettling calmness. Marco disliked her immediately, not because she was incompetent, but because she saw things he'd spent years trying not to see. She examined the photos with a surgeon's precision, asking questions that made the younger officers shift uncomfortably. "What is he feeling here?" she asked, pointing to a photo of the positioned bodies. "Feeling?" Marco echoed, confused. "Yes, these aren't random arrangements. He's expressing something." "He's expressing madness," one officer muttered. "No," Elena said softly, "not madness, control." Her analysis unfolded like a slow unwinding of a knot. She described the killer's likely habits, his routines, his capacity for patience. She suggested he might live near one of the crime sites, somewhere he felt comfortable. She pointed out slight variations in the murders over time, hesitations, shifts in method that suggested emotional fluctuations. Marco listened, torn between skepticism and reluctant fascination. Then she asked the question no one had dared voice aloud. "Inspector, do you believe he watches the investigation?" Marco's silence answered her. "He does," she said. "He studies you, studies the police. He wants to stay ahead, but he also wants to participate." "He's not participating," Marco snapped. "He's destroying lives." "Perhaps both," Elena replied quietly. Her words unsettled him. Over the years, he had felt a presence behind the case, a kind of dark partnership, as though every move he made was mirrored by someone in the shadows, someone anticipating him, someone responding to him. The next murder proved Elena right. It happened in 1982. A couple parked in a secluded clearing near San Cassiano. They were found in the morning, shot, mutilated, arranged. But this time, something new waited at the scene, a small wooden box placed near the girl's hand. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a bullet, a .22 caliber slug, clean, untarnished. And a note. 3 words typed like the last message. "I see you." Marco's breath shivered as he read it. Elena stood beside him, studying the note like a communion wafer from some blasphemous ceremony. "This isn't taunting," she murmured. "It's acknowledgement." "Of what?" Marco demanded. "That you're getting closer." But the words didn't feel like reassurance. They felt like a threat. The case lit Florence on fire. Panic swept through the countryside. Patrols increased. Rumors erupted, sightings, shadows, strangers. Marco found himself barely sleeping, his mind looping endlessly through timelines, maps, victim profiles. One night, after 3 cups of stale coffee, he stared at the board and noticed something he hadn't before. A cluster. 3 crime scenes forming a tight triangle near San Cassiano, all within walking distance of each other. "Lucia," he called, his voice sharp, "look at this." She stepped closer, brow furrowed. "They're close together." "Too close," Marco said. "A killer doesn't return to the same area repeatedly unless—" "He lives there," Lucia finished. Marco nodded. "Or he works there, or he feels safe there." They cross-referenced residents: farmers, craftsmen, laborers, retirees, some with criminal records, most without. Hundreds of names, too many to narrow meaningfully, but Marco's instinct sparked, faint but real. "He's in there," he whispered. "I know he is." Over the next weeks, Marco and his team visited homes, spoke to villagers, observed routines. A few men stood out: odd hours, isolated habits, inconsistent alibis. But odd didn't equal guilty. Until they met a man named Pietro Salvi. He lived alone in a small stone house near the woods. Quiet, polite, with eyes that seemed to measure everything they saw. His boots matched the tread type from the riverbank, not an exact match to the print, but similar enough to raise suspicion. He owned a hunting rifle, but not, he claimed, a pistol. He kept to himself. Too much to ignore, not enough to accuse. Marco left the house feeling a cold knot in his chest. "Do you think it's him?" Lucia asked. "I don't know," Marco muttered, "but something is wrong there." They put Salvi under discreet surveillance. For days he led a perfectly ordinary life. Work, home, walks through the hills, nothing unusual, nothing incriminating. Until the night he disappeared. Marco stormed into Salvi's empty home at dawn, cursing under his breath. A drawer left open, clothes strewn on a chair, a sense of urgency in the absence, but no sign of struggle, no note. He had vanished into the hills sometime during the night. Or someone had taken him. Alina studied the house quietly. "If he is the monster," she said, "he's running. If he's not, the monster may have silenced him." Marco felt a chill spread through him. The next murder came only a month later. This time the bodies were left openly, in a field visible from the road. The arrangement was the same, but the violence greater, almost frantic. A message scratched into the dirt near the girl's head read, "You look in the wrong places." Marco stared at the words as though they might strike him. The sky above was clear, the sunlight indifferent. Officers moved around him quietly, shaken by the escalation. Alina approached. "He's unraveling," she said, "or he wants you to think he is." Marco clenched his teeth. "He's playing with us." "Yes," she agreed, "but games end." Their evidence grew, but never enough. Their suspect list swelled, then shrank. Leads sparkled, then died. The monster slipped between them like smoke. Yet something had changed. He was angrier now, sloppier, more exposed. Every murder was a conversation, one Marco was beginning to understand. Late one night, Marco returned home for the first time in 2 days. He dropped his coat, poured a drink, and collapsed into a chair. The silence pressed heavily against him. Then he noticed it. A folded piece of paper slid halfway under his front door. His blood froze. He approached slowly, heart pounding. The paper was thin, folded once. No envelope, inside a single typed line. "We are closer than you think." His hands shook as he read it again. "Not you. We." The monster wasn't addressing Marco alone anymore. He was including himself. As if the hunt bound them together. As if they were connected. As if they were partners. A knock sounded behind him. Marco spun, gun drawn. Lucia stood in the doorway, startled. "Sir, are you all right? You look pale." Marco lowered the gun, breath unsteady. He was here. Her eyes widened. "Here in your home." "He left this." Marco handed her the note. She read it, jaw tightening. "We need protection on you," she said. "We need." "No," Marco cut in. "We need to find him." "But sir, if he knows where you live." "He's known for years," Marco said coldly. He felt Alina arrive moments later, drawn by the commotion. She studied the note with a strange, almost pained expression. "He's crossing boundaries," she murmured. "It means he's anxious." "Or confident," Marco replied. "Both," Alina said. "He's afraid of being caught, but he's also certain he can outwit you. That combination is dangerous." Marco looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Killers like him," Alina said softly, "become volatile when they sense the end approaching." "The end of what?" "Their reign," she said, "or their fantasies, or their life." Marco absorbed this, mind racing. That night he didn't sleep, not even a moment. He sat by the window, watching the empty street, waiting for a shadow that never came. But the next morning, as the sun rose pale and weak over Florence, a strange clarity settled over him. The monster wasn't taunting him anymore. He was calling him. And for the first time Marco felt, not hope, but certainty. The end was coming. For one of them. Maybe for both. The days that followed moved with a strange, taut stillness, as though Florence itself were holding its breath. Marco felt it everywhere, in the clipped conversations of officers, in Alina's quiet watchfulness, in the tension vibrating beneath his own skin. The monster had crossed into his life now, stepped deliberately into his private world, and Marco knew that meant one thing. The killer was preparing for something final. They doubled patrols, set traps, watched the wooded hills with a predator's patience. But the monster had lived in these landscapes for nearly 2 decades. He knew the blind spots, the forgotten paths, the rhythm of the night. Every time Marco thought he felt a shift in the air, a hint of presence, the moment evaporated. Then late one evening, a call came from a village near San Cassiano. A woman had seen a man standing at the edge of her field, staring toward her house. When she called out, he didn't move, only turned his head slowly before disappearing into the trees. She recognized him, she said, not personally but from the papers, from the whispers, from the fear. Marco was there within 20 minutes. The woman trembled as she spoke, wringing her hands until her knuckles turned white. "His eyes," she kept repeating. "They looked wrong, empty." Marco questioned her gently, but the details were thin. A silhouette, a faint glint of metal, a presence. But it was the direction the figure had been walking that caught Marco's attention, not toward her home, not toward the village, but deeper into the woods, toward a stretch of abandoned farmland where an old vineyard had long since withered. He sent the officers back to the station and took only Lucia and Alina with him. The night was cold, sharp, the kind that made every breath visible. Their flashlights cut thin beams through the darkness as they walked the overgrown path, the crunch of dead leaves beneath their boots sounding too loud, too fragile. "Marco," Alina whispered, "if he's here, he wants you to follow." "I know," Marco said. "That's why we're doing this carefully." The path narrowed. Trees leaned close like looming witnesses. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called soft, mournful. They moved slowly, alert, breath shallow. Then Lucia froze. "There," she whispered. A faint light flickered ahead. A lantern hanging from the branch of an old cypress, swaying gently in the wind. Beneath it, the outline of a small stone building, an abandoned shed, long forgotten behind the dead vineyard. Marco felt it instantly. This was a stage, a deliberate place, chosen. He motioned for them to stay low. They approached in silence, hearts thudding like war drums. Every instinct screamed danger, but something deeper pushed Marco forward, something grim, inevitable. He reached the doorway first. Inside, the darkness was thick, pooling like ink.